Deuteronomy 34, let's call this one 120 because that is how old Moses was when he went to the top of Mount Nebo in this chapter and died. It's going to say in verse 1 that in fact he went to the top of Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, where God showed him all the land. And in verse 5 it is indeed going to say he died there. Verse 7 is going to let us know it was at 120 years old, but his eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated, it is going to say. And so in all the things that Moses endured, God still propped him up with strength that was uncommon for a man of 120. But two things I want to notice from the following verses. Talk about Joshua, of course, who's going to take over for Moses, and then a final word about Moses himself. In verse 9, it's going to say, and Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses laid his hands on him. But after that, it is going to say that the people obeyed Joshua. Oh my goodness. After all the things that Moses went through, God himself saying, these 10 times the people have tested me, meaning they were testing God. But who was the proxy for all of the rebuttals, the complaints, and the anger? It was Moses. But understand this, in your life, there may be times when you are going through it, but you might not be aware of the ways in which you are carving out a place of peace for those who come after you. Because in so many ways, that seems to be what Moses did for Joshua. Because even though Joshua is going to say, choose this day whom you will serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, he still had a very different history with Israel because they indeed obeyed, and he's going to commend them for the ways in which they obeyed, even though they weren't perfect. And so that's a very different experience, but understand how much of that had to do inevitably with all of the things that Moses endured. And so be encouraged to the degree you are enduring some things and making you shake your head and want to throw up your hands and maybe even give up, to the degree that you know you are trying to carve out a place for either your young ones or the people who you are mentoring. You never know how much of an effect you are having and the peace that they will experience in the days ahead. But likewise, this is what the word's going to say about Moses in verse 10. And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. See, none of us are probably going to rise to the heights of Moses, but understand these two things. One, that Moses and Joshua both had a unique impact. There was no need for measuring because each made a mark in his own way and both were commendable. And so understand, I appreciated that even more when I thought back to a generation of young men I had the opportunity to mentor as they were high school basketball players going on to do great things. But at the time, I was unable to appreciate the mark that they were making on basketball in the state of Minnesota at the time they came through. See, I just assumed that it was always going to be that good, and then we were always going to have a pool of talent that great. But after those young men graduated, it was a while before another group of young men came through, rising to the heights that they had risen to, achieving the things that they achieved. And so please never underestimate the unique nature of the mark you are making on the world, especially to the degree you are doing it like Joshua and Moses, faithful to the things that God is calling you to do. Why? Because as we mentioned before, the mark that we can make on our own is nothing in comparison to the mark that God can make through us. Noticing that this passage makes a point of mentioning that Joshua had a wisdom that came from Moses, laying his hands on him and essentially giving him a part of the encouragement and the strength that God provided him, the kind of strength that was unabated in Moses at 120 years of age, and that gave Joshua the ability to be wise in ways that allowed Israel to obey him in a way that few other kings or men of God experienced. And so understand, there's a certain mark we can make on our own, but it's nothing like the mark we can make when God is empowering the things that we do, which is why we say his best to you as you go forward in him. God willing, making a unique mark on this world that no one else can make, providing a place of peace for those who come after you.